Back. It's a very steep room here, so I appreciate everybody braving that steepness. So my name is Darren Reesberg. I'm the president here at Hartwick College, and it's a great pleasure to welcome our community to our campus, both the community outside of Hartwick College as well as our own Hartwick College students, faculty, and staff for this special forum for the 122nd Assembly District, sponsored by the Oneonta Area League of Women Voters. I'm very happy to see we're hosting this debate and that we're partnering with the League of Women Voters. I'm glad to know that all candidates were invited to participate, which is certainly a requirement here for us at Hartwick College when we're hosting debates like this. And of course, also very happy that Dan Butterman and Colton Menig agreed to participate. This debate has special significance for the Hartwick community in light of the voter registration and information campaigns that we have been engaged in throughout this semester. In total, we registered 149 students and staff members this semester. And we helped to request more than 100 additional absentee ballots for members of our community. We hope these efforts will not only lead to increased voter participation in the 2022 midterm elections, but they'll also help foster a sense of lifelong civic engagement among our students. Before I turn this over to our moderator, Stephanie Bauer, I do want to take just a moment to thank a number of organizations and individuals for their hard work in organizing the debate tonight. First and foremost, I would like to thank the Oneonta Area League of Women Voters for sponsoring the debate. I would also like to thank the Cooperstown Area League of Women Voters for their extraordinary support of the event. Our special thanks go out to League members Maureen Murray, Patty McLeish, Lisa Semmels, and Stephanie Bauer. There are a number of offices and departments around our campus that made this event possible, including the Political Science Department, the Sociology, Criminology, and Human Services Department, and the Office of Civic Engagement. Professor Laurel Elder of the Political Science Department, Professor Zach McKenney of the Sociology, Criminology, and Human Services Department, and Alex Douglas with the Office of Civic Engagement deserve special recognition for their hard work and tireless commitment. Chris Spiewak, as always, where's Chris? Okay, was instrumental in taking care of all of our audiovisual needs for this debate. We'd also like to recognize the Otsego County Board of Elections, especially Jacob Gillette and Christina Morrison, for their help in registering our students to vote. Many thanks go to our Student Government Association for their support of the debate and for their willingness to end their scheduled meeting tonight early so their members could attend. Our list of thanks would not be complete without recognizing the enormous contributions of our students. There are too many to name here, but it was absolutely extraordinary watching our students register their colleagues to vote, make posters promoting the importance of this midterm election, and assist with the preparation for this debate. You, our students, are an inspiration to all of us. Last but certainly not least, we'd like to thank our candidates, Daniel Butterman of the Democratic Party and Colton Menig of the Working Families Party, for their willingness to participate in the candidate forum this evening. One important reminder, the views expressed by our guests tonight represent those of the speaker and not of Hartwick College. The college does not support or oppose any particular candidate, whether or not participating in this event. With that, I want to thank you all again for coming tonight, and please join me in welcoming Colton and Dan.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Reesberg. And thank you, Hartwick College, and all the people he named for having us tonight. I just want to make sure this is the evening for the Candidates Night for State Assembly District 122. If you're looking for geology or chemistry, you got to check down the hall somewhere else. They're not here. My name is Stephanie Bauer, and I'm the team leader for the League of Women Voters of Oneonta. I will serve as your moderator tonight, and I'd like you to meet our timekeeper, Gail LaPointe. She's down here, right down there. She has little stop signs and 15-second signs, and she'll be waving them at our candidates so that we keep the momentum going. I would also like you to, you've met Colton Menig and Dan Butterman, and I particularly want to thank you, gentlemen, for participating in our democracy. Without you, we wouldn't have choices when we go to the ballot box, the polling place. Thank you for volunteering your time and all your efforts toward making our democracy better. We'll hear more from them in a few minutes. I also want to really thank and welcome you, the audience. Democracy is not a once and done kind of government. It's something that we have to keep working on all the time. And the most direct way that most of us participate with our government is by voting. And in order to vote wisely and in our own best interests, we need to know who we're voting for. So I applaud you, because tonight is a form of participation. You've come to the meeting, you've got your ears open, you're listening to the candidates, you're thinking about the issues you'd like them to talk about. We're used to sort of consuming media that's full of ads that might make you fearful of the other side. Tonight you have the opportunity to listen to the candidates talk about their skills and their policy ideas in their own words. You have a chance to ask them questions about the issues that most concern you. The evening is not designed to make anyone fearful or angry or argumentative. It's designed to help you find the person you want to vote for. So I thank you, the audience, for your participation in our democracy. Do we have any members of the press with us tonight? We've invited the press to come so that they could have the opportunity to hear the candidates, but I guess nobody's taken us up on that. A little bit more, and then we'll get to the men. A little bit more. This meeting was planned and conducted by the Voter Services Committee of both the Cooperstown and Oneonta Area League of Women Voters, and I have to say a brief word about the League of Women Voters. The purpose of the League of Women Voters is to promote political responsibility through informed and active participation of citizens in our government. The League is nonpartisan. That's a confusing word. It means that we do not support or oppose any political party or any particular candidate. It's political, the League is political in that it reaches positions on selected government officials after studying, and it takes action for positive change. So we do lobbying, but we don't pick and choose candidates that we want to support. Throughout its history, the League of Women Voters has been providing opportunities for candidates seeking public office to take their case directly to the voters. The League has been seen as fair, unbiased, and competent providers of services to voters. And League candidates' nights are controlled really by the League, not by the candidates. Although our name says women, for about 50 years we've welcomed families, men, students, as well as women, and I hope you'll consider joining us. And forms are available, I think, perhaps on the outside table. Do we have application? Yeah. Out of courtesy for our candidates, we ask that your cell phones be turned off or turned to vibrate. And while we are recording, it is not live streaming tonight, but it will be posted on, Zach, can you tell me?
It will be posted on our page at Hartwick, and it will be available for the Oneonta Area League of Women Voters to post on their page.
Post on the Oneonta League and on the Hartwick League, so you can review or look at it again if you're interested. Ground rules. Each candidate is going to make an opening statement for us. They're free to tell us anything they want. 3 minutes each, and they picked using like little numbers. Dan's going to go first. The timekeeper is going to keep track of their 3 minutes and hold them up a 15 or 30-second thing to remind them when their time's up. After the opening statements, we have questions for the candidates. If you want to write a question, you can get it to Zach, hold up your hand, or he will come and pick it up. And if we exhaust these questions, we're going to probably open it for you to stand up and ask your question just from the audience. But if you're shy, put your question in writing and it will get asked by me. At the very end, the candidates will have 2-minute opportunity for a closing statement, and I'm hoping we'll wrap up by 9 o'clock or a little bit before. So now I'm going to turn this over to Dan Butterman for his opening statement.
Well, good evening, and thank you to Professor McKenney and the League of Women Voters for putting this event together and coming through yet again to provide this important opportunity for the voters to make an informed decision. We're working in a time of misinformation and misunderstanding, so it's more important than ever for us to be available to answer your questions and to be clear points on the issues. So I'm sorry that our Republican candidate could not be here tonight to answer those, but I'm thankful that the Working Families candidate did say yes. And I'm happy that we're here on campus too at Hartwick College, because I have a special place in my heart for Hartwick College. It was 11 years ago that we got the call for my wife to come teach music here. I think some of you know her as Dr. G. And our life is immeasurably better having received that call, to be a part of the Hartwick community, an Oneonta community, and to be raising our 3 girls here in central New York. It is a gift that we treasure, and it's a gift that we want to see other families have too. But the fact of the matter is, not others can do that. People are leaving our state for greener pastures, and we need to turn that around. And we need to talk about some of the issues tonight that can help make that happen. So as we get through our questions and our conversation tonight, I want you to find some hope, because that's what I'm filled with as I've gone through this campaign, is hope for a better tomorrow. Because although we have challenges in front of us, we can overcome those. I am optimistic about the future here, and for a couple reasons. One is that, as I've learned about this district in central New York, we are filled with potential. We can be leaders again in farming, renewable energy, high-tech manufacturing, education, craft food and beverage, just to name a few. And the list goes on. Not many other places can boast that kind of potential, and that makes me excited. But what gives me optimism are the people that I meet along the way. This district is filled with genuine people that want to see a better tomorrow for their families. And they're willing to take change as it is coming to them to make that better tomorrow a possibility. And that's what gives me hope and optimism for tomorrow. And I hope that when you end this forum tonight, that you feel that way too. And that you feel a second thing, and that when you go to the ballot box next Tuesday or tomorrow, that you can cast your vote for me with confidence, knowing that you've picked the right person to take on this important job. Because it takes the right person to do it, someone willing to work across the lines with Republicans and Democrats alike, upstate, downstate, with every stakeholder to build the teams and work collaboratively and creatively to find the solutions that will benefit all of us. So thank you so much for being here. I look forward to the conversation and the questions.
Thank you. Colton.
So I'd like to start by thanking the League of Women Voters and Hartwick College for hosting this debate tonight. I want to thank Dan for agreeing to be here tonight to discuss the issues and what our solutions are. I agree. I think it's important that voters have an idea of what our viewpoints are and what our background is, so they can make an educated decision when they cast their ballot this November. And I also want to thank all of you for coming out here tonight and being part of the work to find solutions to the problems we face as a region. So I want to start by telling you a little bit more about myself. I was born and raised in central New York, the son of working class parents who often took on multiple jobs to make ends meet. And growing up, I saw the struggles that my family was going through, that my friends were going through, my neighbors were going through, and I knew early on that I wanted to get involved. I wanted to be part of finding the solution to all of the struggling that I was seeing. So I have since then spent my life advocating for central New York. I've worked with 3 U.S. senators. I've worked with a congressman, with 2 advocacy organizations, a federal agency, and with 3 local public schools. During the pandemic, I saw how hard our schools were being hit with staffing shortages, increased costs, increased needs, shifting the way that we were delivering our education. And so I got re-involved in our education system to support our local public schools, which is actually what I'm currently doing to this day. And throughout this work, I have built coalitions and worked across the aisle with Republicans and Democrats and independents. I have worked on legislation, including working on comprehensive environmental legislation on the federal level. I've advised on policy, including policy related to veterans affairs and related to expanding access to health care. And I've performed government oversight, making sure that our government agencies are operating in a fiscally responsible and ethical way. These experiences will allow me to get to work on day one fighting for our communities. fighting for tax relief for our working families, for our retirees, our farmers, and our small businesses, fighting to bring funding and resources back home for infrastructure and education, and fighting to champion environmental protection. I'm ready to get to work for Central New York on day one. I look forward to talking more about the issues affecting our region tonight and how I plan to effectively address those issues. Thank you.
Now, I know that your applause is very encouraging for these gentlemen, but applause can also be seen as a way of voting for them. Oh, we applauded louder for Mr. Butterman or for Mr. Cole, and we don't want to vote tonight. We want to save our vote for November 8th. So I'm going to ask you very kindly not to applaud in between and when they finish their answers. And I think that makes it fair for everybody, and it puts you in a position to continue to think about who am I going to choose. We'll start with our first question, and because Mr. Butterman went first, we're going to start with Mr. Menig as the first question. They'll both have 2 minutes to give their answer, but starting with you. The first question is, the 122nd district is such a large and diverse district. How have you been able to learn about the different needs and concerns of the constituents?
So the most important aspect of campaigning, especially in a large district like this, is talking to voters, being at events, knocking on doors, making sure that you are connecting and you are not just talking to them and saying, this is who I am, this is what I think, but asking them, what is the issue that's most bothering you? What is the issue that you are facing right now that you just can't seem to get over? And what do you think we should do about it? I think too often we have politicians that get elected and they say they're going to do all these things, which typically they don't actually do, and they don't spend that time talking and connecting with voters. So I've traveled to every town, every village, every hamlet in this district, talking to voters, connecting with them about the issues that matter to them, talking to them about the difficulty they're having filling their gas tank to get to work, the difficulty addressing and paying for groceries with the inflation that we are seeing, the difficulty in just living their life right now, and how frustrated they are with the gridlock in our government that is not doing enough to work for our communities and for our families. And so I think that's the most important thing that we can do as candidates, and that's what I've tried to do throughout this campaign.
I'm very thankful to be a part of the Oneonta community. Since day one, my wife and I joined the community band, and that led me to join the school board, the planning board, the community action partnership, and a few others. And you get to the pulse of things in the community where you get to play in a lot of sandboxes. And so going into this campaign, I felt pretty well prepared because of years of involvement in community affairs as far as what we need going forward, what we need from representation. Then you want to connect that with the rest of this new district. And so it is a large district, 28 towns, about 1,000 square miles, 2 hours from end to end. I did it today. I can tell you it's a joyous drive. And so one of the goals I have, obviously, is to win the election. But the other part is things along the way and to connect with people. So I made a goal to go to the town board meetings, every town in this district. And I almost made, I think of the 28, I got to 24 of them, plus the villages. And when you go there, I don't go just to say hi and leave. I go there and I sit in the whole meeting. And then I talk to the town board meeting members afterwards, the supervisor, and oftentimes connect with them after the meeting. And to hear about their concerns and what they need from Albany, this is the process that I've undertaken to know what it is where I can connect the dots. Because Plainfield doesn't necessarily know what's going on in the town of Lenox. That's my job, is to try to see what it is that we can do together better. And that is why I've been spending, I think, 20,000 miles on the road this summer doing that, connecting each and every town, going to the events, doing the things that you're supposed to do, because this is about the people and about connecting them, because they're the ones that need to be represented. And being there to listen and then to try to formulate ideas based on those concerns has been a good process. And of course, we're going to talk about some of those tonight. So I'm looking forward to the next question on that.
Okay, we're going to alternate, which means that now Mr. Butterman's, you get to go again.
Yeah.
Given that renewable energy is a growing business in rural areas, what's your opinion about solar farms versus farmland?
This is a really fun topic to talk about because I'm really excited about the prospects of renewable energy. We're finally coming to that intersection where renewable energy is a part of the cost equation where it becomes more and more attractive, which means it's going to be integrated more and more into our energy mix. And so the state had set some pretty big goals to go after for renewable energy over the next 30 years. And so that's going to take land in order to install solar installations as well as wind. And so then the problem comes up, and this is what I've learned talking to some town leaders as far as how we balance local issues with the statewide goals and where we put those solar installations. And one thing I learned is that not to call them solar farms, and that I learned that by going to the Farm Bureau, and that talking to them about what their needs are, because the farmers are concerned about their future in farming and how solar could inhibit their progress. And so this is a balanced approach as far as we can do both things. We can develop our farms for next generation farming, at the same time include more renewable energy into the mix. And so we can balance those. And so like a Farm Bureau policy that focuses on this is saying that we should focus state projects on land that is not ideal for farming. And many farmers will tell you exactly where that land is. And so if elected, then my goal is to try to focus our projects, the state paid for projects, on land that is not usable for farmers. That's a good way to balance the projects and also support home rule, because each of the towns is working on zoning and updating their comp plans so that they can deal with this as well as other issues, and we need to respect that process too. And if we do that, we'll get local leadership buying into the process of transitioning to renewable energy, which in the long run will benefit all of us.
So this is an issue that's especially perplexing for our rural communities, like the ones that I grew up in. So I've experienced this issue directly growing up. And I've said since the beginning of this campaign, nobody knows the realities, the issues, the life of a community like the people that live there. And we need to put more power back in the hands of the communities and the people that live there, and not in the hands of Albany and people who have probably never been in upstate New York before, let alone in our neck of the woods. So what we're seeing right now is a lot of communities are hesitant to expand the solar programs in their towns because of the concerns about farmland. And the state is starting to put pressure on these communities, and in some instances are talking about forcing communities to set up more of these solar installations on lands that some of which is going to end up being farmland. So we need to make sure that our communities have a decision in this, that they're the ones deciding this. And if a community says no, frankly, the state should be convincing them otherwise if that is what we need to be doing, as opposed to forcing this on to communities. So I support the state making the case to communities rather than making the proclamation to communities about what they need to do with their solar projects. Beyond that, in the meantime, we do need to start moving toward renewable energies, and we need to start now. And so I support using municipal buildings that the state owns, that the state controls, that the state can make those proclamations too without stepping on anyone's toes because they own those buildings. Start putting solar panels on those buildings. Put wind installations on those grounds to start moving us in that direction while we're working on convincing our small towns that solar energy is the future, will bring green jobs to their communities, and will benefit all of us.
So you're going to go again now.
Got it.
As a young woman in New York State, I'm curious what your views are on abortion rights. Will you protect abortion rights for women?
The simple answer is yes. We need to do everything in our power to protect abortion rights for women and for trans men, and make sure that that is an accessible right to our citizens in New York State. But even beyond that, we also need to, in this time with the reversal of Roe v. Wade, make sure that we are a safe haven for individuals from other states to come and access these rights if it is not available to them in their home state. And that includes making sure that we are challenging any laws in other states that seek to limit a person's ability to come to New York and seek a legal health care, a legal procedure that is their right in New York State. Another state should not have the right to tell New York what healthcare services it can provide to anybody within their state. And so we need to challenge any laws which they're talking about putting out in other states that are restricting abortion access. We need to make sure we're challenging those in court and making sure that everybody feels safe to come here and access those services. Beyond that, we need to start investing resources and making sure we're addressing the inequity in reproductive resource centers throughout New York State. Oftentimes we find that in poorer communities and in communities of color that these resources are not always readily available to them, that it's particularly difficult for them to access their healthcare rights. And so we need to make sure that as a state, we are ensuring that communities that are poor and communities of color have the same access that wealthier communities do.
When this campaign started before the Supreme Court decision, and since that decision was announced, I get that question frequently when I'm out on the campaign trail. Last week I was up in Sherrill, and I went into a diner for some coffee along the way, and there's these two women there, and I introduced myself. And they had one question, and the question is, where do you stand on a woman's right to choose? And I said, I always support a woman's right to choose. And they said, that's enough. That's the only thing I'm thinking about right now, is are you going to support me? And I think they got their vote for that. So this issue as far as reproductive rights and reproductive health care has come up frequently. And thankfully, New York State had codified in 2019 with the New York Reproductive Health Act, which gave us some responsibility now, in that other states are now taking the opportunity with the Supreme Court decision to forbid or severely restrict their residents for doing abortion care in their home state. And so this is something, thankfully, the legislature and the governor is aware of and is planning for, because now folks will be coming here for care that they cannot receive in their home state. And so this is something where that will be debated as far as should our legislature pay for these kinds of services. And the straight answer is absolutely yes, because it is our job to take care of people, whether they come from New York or not. And so if so elected, the expansion of rights to reproductive health care as well as health care in general will be a greater responsibility on our legislature, and I plan to act on that.
Our next question. If either of you are elected, you will represent a rather conservative or purple district. How will you navigate that fact alongside your own more left, liberal, progressive views?
There's always a bit of a balancing process when you're trying to understand a person's core needs and concerns. And my feeling is that although I'm Democrat, someone chose the Republican Party. I think always start with the baseline that they did so in good faith because they believed something about the party that they were attached to. And I want to understand what that is. For example, my dad was a Republican for years and years. He's been a small business owner for 50 years, and he told me, I joined the Republican Party because they support small business. Perfectly rational reason to do that. And so when I talk to people, I want to find out what their reason is for being a part of the party and how that connects to their current concerns. And I've done that repeatedly with Democrats and Republicans, non-party affiliated voters as well. And when you have that kind of conversation, it is revealing as far as how we can work together, because the things that connect us far outnumber the things that separate us. And a conversation focused on listening to that point of view will find out what those things are. It's worth noting, though, that there is a point of concern with our political parties and the state of affairs across the country and even in New York. In the last 5 years alone, non-party registrations have outpaced any other, and that continues this year, to the point now that non-affiliated, no-party voters now outnumber Republicans. They're also gaining on Democrats. We need to be thinking differently as far as what we expect from our political leaders and how they relate to the parties. And so when I enter the conversation, I don't enter it as a Democrat. I enter it as a person that's concerned about our future as a state and how I can connect with this other person who also has the same concern, and how we can work together to find out where's the common ground so we can take the next step forward and do so together.
So I've spent my entire life working with Republicans and Democrats and independents on a range of policy issues, including climate legislation, including immigration legislation. And so I have that experience of working across the aisle and building those coalitions with people who you may not agree with 100%, you may not even agree with 5%. But on that issue, you found common ground. You found somewhere where you can come together and fight for a solution. And so that's important. I think the most important thing when we're connecting with Republicans, Democrats, Independents is not their party, but having those conversations. What I've found throughout this campaign and even prior to this campaign is that most voters don't care so much about your party affiliation. They care more about whether or not they're being heard. Most voters feel like the Republicans don't hear them, the Democrats don't hear them, nobody hears them in government. People are talking to them to get their vote. They're going to Albany, they're going to DC, they're going wherever, and they're doing whatever they want to do regardless of what they told you that they were going to do. And so I think having those conversations, listening to voters, letting them be heard, and taking what they're saying and actually making something of that. I've talked to voters and immediately after gone home and said, okay, we need to change this policy proposal on our website. Okay, we need to talk more about this. We need to research this topic because this voter made a really good point about something and we need to take that into consideration. And so I've found that Republican, Democrat, Independent, when you talk to a voter and you can make them feel heard, you can make them feel like you are actually listening and you are going to take their perspectives and their concerns to Albany with you, that they don't care so much about what party is next to your name on the ballot. They care that you listened.
How will you support our public school systems and expand funding or resources for communities with the most demonstrated need? And I think there's a follow-up question too.
Great. So, as I said, I currently am working in the field of education, and my perspective is we need more legislators in Albany that actually understand the education system on the day-to-day basis, understand what it takes to lesson plan, to also have to consider the emotional needs of your students, to be all of these things for your students, and also fill out the paperwork at the end of the day that the state expects you to fill out and have ready for them at the end of the year. There's a lot that's put on teachers, on administrators, that people in Albany need to understand that is really hard to understand if you've never been in a classroom. In terms of funding, I think our funding system is broken. The formula is not working. The formula that we currently use data that can sometimes be upwards of 10 years old to determine how much money that we get today. And that shouldn't be the case. We have access to up-to-date data that we should be using. We should be using the cost to provide a basic sound education for a student today, not the cost that we had 3 years ago. So we need to fix that formula in the short run. In the long run, I'd like to see a shift in our education funding so that it's less based on property taxes and school taxes and more based on an equitable funding so that we're making sure that your zip code does not determine your educational outcomes. The education you receive does not determine what jobs you can get, what colleges you can get into, because this school can offer college level classes in high school and this school can't afford those programs. So we need to make sure that no matter what school you go to, you can get the education you need to go and be successful if you just work hard and put in the time and effort.
So on the issue of school funding, it's going to be a long transition to move into a better system that works for every school in this district and across New York State. And so the disparity between schools evident in the funding has got to be fixed because the end result is that school districts are not on equal playing fields and therefore students don't get the same opportunity and outcome that they deserve. And so the things that we can do to change that coming from Albany are some overarching goals here. One is to get away from the property value equation for the foundation aid and move towards an income-based solution. Like in the question says, how can we identify need? Income assessments will be better able to identify need in a particular community, whereas property values don't. For example, here in Oneonta, we're in a beautiful campus. Hartwick, SUNY, and the hospitals, valuable properties. They count towards our wealth factors here in Oneonta, but they're not taxable, which means the taxable property for which Oneonta collects its tax levy comes from about 48% of the properties in this area. You can describe other scenarios in other towns where there is a property value mismatch, and what happens is Albany doesn't see clearly the need in that community. Going into this year, pre-pandemic, the free and reduced price lunch applications, in my view, are more indicative of need in a particular community. And they range from about 40% to 50% around the different schools here in Oneonta, and that matches similar conditions throughout the schools in the other parts of the district. And so the problem, though, is that there's a grant now that will provide for lunch for about 3 years for most of the schools, and so that data is not going to be available as it was in the past. And so this makes it even more imperative to move towards an income base, because that will be more indicative of the need. And you will find that with the average incomes, the household income in Otsego County is about $50,000. That is average for a household of two income earners. That shows a higher need in some other parts of the state. But the problem is the state doesn't see that, and we need to put a better lens on the state.
We're going to stick with that topic of education. Do you support tuition-free or near-free tuition in community colleges in New York?
Yes.
Yes.
With Oneonta being a college town, what will be done about crime rates around here and around this district?
Who's first? Is that me? Okay. So there's a lot that we need to do to make sure that our communities feel safe for the families that live here and for those that are living in the community year-round, particularly in discussing college students and areas around colleges. I think that we need to do more as a society to invest in our police force, to make sure that we are investing in training, investing in advanced technology, to make sure that their job is easier and they can actually enforce the laws that are already on the books. Now, that does not mean that our police force should have the most advanced weapons and military-grade armor and military-grade vehicles, but we need to make sure that they have the resources that they need to do the job that they are hired to do, that we pay them to do. And oftentimes we find that they are not getting the resources and the training that they need to fulfill their obligations. And they're asking for those resources, and we are still not providing that. So that's one thing that we need to do. Another thing in addressing crime more generally is that we need to improve our access to mental health care in our communities. Too many communities throughout our district, particularly our rural communities, do not have equitable access to health care, and even when they do have access to health care, that access is so expensive, it's almost like it's not there for them at all. So we need to make sure that we are working to make sure that that access is actually there and it is affordable so they can actually reach it. And I think one great way to do that is to improve our mental health services in our public high schools, which will help address this inequity in our rural schools, and then to continue planning out from that.
So the question, I think, needs answer on two parts. One is on the police department staffing, and another part is a touch on the bail reform that was passed in 2019, effective 2020. So for the staffing for our police departments, like in Oneonta or the Sheriff's Department in Otsego County, they are understaffed in part because of funding and the inability to retain their officers. So I might be wrong on the numbers by 1 or 2, but I think Oneonta is, the ideal spot is I think 28 officers, and they're down to 21. That is quite a decrease in staffing, and when there is that kind of stretch put on the officers, it's going to be harder for them to be full capacity to do their jobs. And so one thing that we can do, many of the things that we talk about tonight, will have to do with funding from the state. We have to do a better job of funding our cities. The state aid to municipalities has been flat, I think, for 12 years, and so we need to get that up. And that will help support better funding for our police departments, both in the city here and in the Sheriff's Department. We need to get their better funding so they can provide better salaries, be a better competitive destination for police officers as opposed to finding other career paths. So that's one area where we can support policing in a college town like this. The second is on the issue of bail reform and how that change, or probably better called criminal justice reform because it has many other elements to it, and how that relates to some of the low-level crimes and some of those repeat offenders. And those are where, when I've talked to police officers, that's where their point of concern is, among some others. But on the issue of repeat offenders, where they've arrested someone for a small crime, but then they're out within an hour and then they commit another crime. And so these are where some revisions on that law would be helpful so that those repeat offenses are less likely to happen, because the courts can be empowered, along with the officers, to impose greater restrictions pre-trial while still protecting the defendant's rights.
This is a bit of an FYI. There is a bond issue that we're voting on this time as well. Candidates will be on the front side of your ballot, but the voting on the bond issue will be on the other side of your ballot. So when you go to the polling place, don't forget to turn your paper over, because there's more to do on the other side. And this question has to do with that. If the Clean Water, Clean Air, Green Jobs Bond Act passes, how will that affect our community, and what can you do to help towns and cities in our district receive funding from the programs the Act supports?
So I'll be voting for that act when I flip over the ballot. And it's a good investment for our communities. Going back a little bit, climate change has had an impact across the country and across the world. Catastrophic damages from storms have gone into the billions of dollars. And so being prepared for that, there's part of that as far as green energy solutions, as well as mitigation for flooding and other potential storm damage from climate change. And so this kind of investment is a good first step, proactive measure to ensure that when storms do hit, which they will, that the damage is mitigated because of it. So that's a good investment to start. And when we talk about getting our fair share of these kinds of programs, that's what our representatives are there to do. There's a bit of an advantage in being the majority, that you get a better seat at the table. That would help. But also having a clear eye of where those projects are going to go in your community. And this part adds into some of the community leadership that we already have in place as far as the plans that they are developing. It could be through the DRI projects, where these kinds of projects through the mitigation efforts could be secondary to that, but also beneficial. And this is where having good communication and good relationships with community leaders across the district and across central New York matters, because that way when I go to Albany to advocate for funds for a particular thing, I know exactly what it's for and how I can implement it right away. This is something that will not be an overnight project, but it's something that we need an advocate ready to work on it for the long haul, because it's going to take some time to implement it, and we certainly need those benefits here because we have the same risk as the other parts of the state.
I will also be supporting the proposal when I go to vote on November 8th. So just some numbers on this. The Bond Act allows the government to take up to $4.2 billion in bond to pay for these environmental projects. Currently, it costs New York State roughly $25 billion a year from the effects of climate change. So when we compare those two numbers, this is a reasonable investment in our future and in our environmental future. So we need to do this. We need bold, comprehensive climate change legislation, climate change action. We need it now. We don't need it tomorrow. We don't need it next week, next month, next year. We need it today. And that's why I'm running. That's what I will fight for in Albany. And I will fight to make sure that that funding comes back home here, because the $4.2 billion passing in Albany only goes so far if we do not have an assemblyman in Albany fighting to make sure those funds come back home to serve projects in our communities, to deal with flood mitigation, which is a portion of what those funds are being earmarked for. Central New York has seen increased flooding over the last several years. We need resources to help us address this increase in flooding. This Bond Act will provide those resources if we have an assemblyman who can bring those resources home. And so I plan to go to Albany and fight for those resources. I have a background in fighting for those resources and working across the aisle and working with other legislators to advocate for our communities. And I will utilize that knowledge, that experience, to make sure that every penny that we deserve comes back home here.
Tell us some specific skills that you have that will make you an effective representative.
So I've kind of talked a bit about this already tonight, but I'll kind of expand on that. So throughout my career, advocating for Central New York, I have worked with Republicans in office and with Democrats in office to get things done and to make sure that we are passing legislation that Central New York desperately needs, but that party conflict can sometimes stand in the way of. And so I have the experience to break down those barriers and to build those coalitions. I've done that throughout this campaign even. I have support from Republicans and independents and Democrats. So I think one of the key qualifications for this office in Central New York is that ability to connect with voters across the aisle and from differing viewpoints and backgrounds. Beyond that, I have actual real-world experience working on legislation, working on policy, going through the research and the recommendations from agencies, going through constituent services and listening to and reading constituent phone calls and letters. I have experience in all of the elements that encompass the job of an assembly person. So I can utilize that experience that I have gained to get to work on day one, to be an effective legislator, to make sure that we are bringing those resources back home for our communities. And that's important. We need someone who can get started on day one. We've had elected leaders in the past who it took them a year to pump out their first 5 bills. You know, we need somebody who can put out a bill almost immediately upon getting elected, who doesn't have to learn the ropes, doesn't have to learn how to write a bill, learn how to function in a committee, how to interview somebody who's being suggested as the head of an agency, how to suss out all of the information you need to get from an agency and department head. We need somebody who has all of that experience, and I bring all of that experience to the table, and I hope to bring all of that experience to Albany this January.
So the skill set in a word that I'd like to offer is teamwork. Many of you are probably familiar with TEDx Oneonta. I love that program. I'm also involved in it. And that started in 2016 when I applied for a license to the TED organization to have an event locally, because I thought there would be tremendous value in bringing big ideas to Oneonta and at the same time highlighting our big thinkers here locally or in the region and bringing people to hear those ideas and connecting with one another. I saw tremendous value in that. And I was a bit surprised when TED approved my license application. And then I was also filled with a little bit of nerves because now I had to make it work. So the first thing I did was start recruiting people to be a part of that committee to make that program a reality. And I think it worked really well. I went around the community asking people to be a part of it, people that I already knew, and I knew had different professional skill set and experience that would offer something to make that program something of value to this community. And I think it was a great success because the program that we've offered for the last 5 years has been better each year and 1,000 times better than what it was when I envisioned it when I started. And that betterment is because of the people involved, the people that are part of that committee, because not only did I recruit them, I also wanted them to own this idea because it's not about me. It's not even about them. It's about the community that we're trying to serve, and we're working together. And I think that teamwork in that program is evident in the program that you've seen every September since 2017, and that's an example of the kind of teamwork and leadership that I'll bring to the Assembly, is looking for the people that have the right skill sets, have the right ideas, and how we can connect them to make something better than we would do by ourselves. That's a case in point right here in Oneonta, and something that I'll hopefully repeat in some way or another multiple times, as many times as I need in Albany.
This is a bit of a follow-up to the specific skills. What specific positions have you had that will make you an effective advocate in Albany?
So we've talked to, sorry, is it my first?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, okay. I don't want to jump over here. So we've talked about our resume and the positions we've held, and one thing that I learned as far as what it would be like to be an advocate started when we lived in Texas before we moved to New York. And I did 2 volunteer things. One was for a prison entrepreneurship program for people incarcerated in Texas that were about to be released to try to reestablish them in the workforce and in society and working with inmates to prepare themselves to do that. And the other was court-appointed special advocates working with kids in foster care. And these are people that are in a tough position, that and the kids can't do anything about it. They need an advocate. And so I'll never forget those moments meeting with those kids, with the social workers and the attorneys, and thinking, what is it that they need? Because they are completely dependent on me in order to speak for them as that advocate. And then also to hear the stories of those inmates that were thinking about what are they going to do when they get out of jail and to reestablish their life. I think that is a very tender thing that they are offering to you, and you have to hold that very carefully. And I was very honored that I was given that kind of trust, and I look at that each time I've given a public trust since then in New York, like when being on the school board or being on the board for Opportunities for Otsego. I think of those moments as far as where it is that those people are vulnerable and how they need us to understand and empathize with them so we can carry their interests as carefully and as vigorously as we can when we go to Albany, because those are the people that can't necessarily do it for themselves. And so those positions, those volunteer experiences for me really shape the way I go about my public service.
So I've touched on this briefly in my opening, so I'll expand on this as well. I've worked on the legislative team of 3 U.S. senators and a congressman, working on environmental legislation and veterans bills, and working on healthcare bills, working on criminal justice and foreign policy. So I've worked with senators and congresspeople on that. I also worked with one of the senator's office on government oversight, helping to craft questions for department heads and agency heads that came in and sat before the committee. I personally sat in on interviews with some of these agency heads to discuss some of the issues that we're having and discuss whether or not some of them should be approved or not. And I've advised on whether or not they should be approved. So I've been involved in a lot of those discussions and a lot of those policies. I've also worked with the federal agency. I worked with the Department of Homeland Security, advocating for immigrants that were coming in, particularly immigrants that came in from our southern border. Advocating for their rights if they were held in detention centers or if they were released, making sure that our system was not failing them when they entered our country, making sure that we were doing the right thing, making sure that all of their rights were being upheld throughout the process. And I did that during a time that was particularly difficult related to immigration. And so going to work every day was not an easy task, but it was an important task, and it's something we have to do. And so sometimes we are going to face challenges that are not easy, and it's not going to be easy to go to work every day and face some of the issues that we are facing as a community. But I have a background in going in anyway and still fighting and still getting my hands dirty to make sure that we are fighting for the most vulnerable among us and fighting for our communities.
What are your plans to improve the cellular service and internet infrastructure in upstate New York? With more hybrid or fully remote workers today, how do you plan to support the sustainability of these work environments?
So I've had a lot of questions about this and why we shouldn't just let the market, the free market, determine where the wireless service is, where broadband service is. And I've often told people that if we allowed the free market to decide on some of these things, we would never get them. If we let the free market decide where to put roads, a lot of our rural communities would still have dirt roads. There are places where our government has to get involved because the market just is not going to fill the gap. So we have to fill the gap. So I think our government needs to get more involved in making sure that this is available for our communities, and it's particularly an issue in our rural communities. So I think the government needs to invest in, pushing for more towers, more cellular service, and I also think that we need to extend and expand programs to make it cheaper to access wireless service and cellular service, expand the subsidies and the breaks that were given to families when the pandemic hit, and we knew that children were doing their classes online and a lot of people were working at home, and that you could not sustain a home environment, work, educate your children without these services. The pandemic has shown us how vital it is for our society to have access to these, and we need to invest in those.
This topic comes up quite often when I'm talking to folks, depending on where they are, because they might have spotty service or incomplete service for internet. And so it's obvious that we need to get to 100% coverage across central New York. Without it, we're going to be left behind. So the question is, how do we do it? Thankfully, though, there are some case examples that we can refer to and try to look to ways to replicate that. Here in Otsego County, I think it was 2016 that Otsego Electric, the cooperative here, received some state and federal grants to the tune of about $20 million to start building out fiber optic internet here in Otsego County, primarily for their members to start, but then it would expand to non-members as they go forward. And now they're working their way to install it. That is a good program because the price is going to be fair, it's going to be competitive, it's going to be a competitive option against Spectrum. So that is a case example that works, and there's a few things that I learned in this, in that legislation can focus on funding for those kinds of projects, but also what I've learned, that the utility poles and who's going to update those. Because some of the roadblocks that they found along the way were, if we're going to lease this pole or update this pole, who's going to bear the cost? And so we need to give some guidance and some clarity on that, and in some cases, some funding directly for that purpose. And there's been some projects proposed in other parts of this district. Like in northern Madison County, the Madison County government is looking into adding a similar project through their cooperative that the county would own, but that would be operated by a third party. And this is going to provide coverage in areas of northern Madison County that are not covered right now, and enhance coverage in areas where it's minimal or it's just not quite there. These kinds of things where the state needs to get behind these cooperatives or in the county government with the projects, because they're the ones that are executing them. Our goal is to get behind them. So it's going to be a combination of federal and state support to make it happen. It's been done before, and we're going to have to do it again.
Okay, I'm down to my last question that you have written down. So after this question, I'm going to open it up to see if you have anything else that you'd like to ask. But we'll ask from the floor, so you don't have to write it down. So I'm saying this now so that you have a moment to think and see if there's anything. I'll ask this question, and then I'm going to go over the topics that we've talked about so far, and you can see if there's a question that you would like to ask. We're with you. Yeah. What issues have voters brought up to you as you've been knocking on doors around the district?
Many of the questions that we've talked about tonight have touched on that. They have not necessarily been one thing. We've talked about reproductive health care. We've talked about internet service, criminal justice, support for police. Those things have come up. I wouldn't say one as far outpaced any other topic. Those have come up. Other things that have come up are as far as the districts. This is a redistricting year, and it has been rather confusing with lawsuits and redistricting. So that has come up quite a bit, because at the end of the day, people need to be represented. And this district covers 4 counties, 3 congressional districts, and 2 state senate districts. That's a mouthful. But at the end of the day, people feel left out or pushed aside when they don't know who they can turn to for representation. And so this has come up quite a bit too, as far as how these maps look and how they support our communities. Knowing that the Congress and the Senate had to go through a lawsuit and redistricting another set of maps, and the Assembly is going to do that again next year. So this district that we're vying for right now, the 122nd, may not look the same in 2024 because of these lawsuits and redistricting that will happen yet again. And so this has also come up quite a bit as far as where we draw the lines and how we define who our representatives will be.
The most common issue that has come up for me talking to voters, knocking doors at events, is the cost of living, is the economy. I think that's the issue that's on everybody's mind right now, is how am I going to afford to continue to live my life and do the things that I need and want to do. Unfortunately, we're seeing inflation continue to skyrocket, and the price of food is increasing. And I have moms who are concerned that they can't afford to buy groceries to put in their child's lunch pail to go to school every day. We have people who are concerned that they can't fill up their gas tank to go to work, and if they can't fill up their gas tank to go to work, they can't make money, and it's this never-ending circle. And so at the end of the day, we need to do more as a government, more as elected leaders, to address the rising cost of living in New York State and beyond. And one very common sense way of doing that is to unburden taxpayers by providing tax relief to working families, retirees, small businesses, and farmers. The fact of the matter is our tax system in New York State is broken. It is not fair. We are not all paying our fair share. Working families, retirees, we're paying more than our fair share to get the services that the government provides, while wealthy individuals and big businesses are not paying anything or are barely paying anything, which is nowhere near their fair share. We can continue to fund our government and fund our services if we close that gap, if we give tax relief to those that need it, those that are being overly burdened by our tax system, while also making sure that the wealthiest among us are paying their fair share for the services that they also enjoy.
Okay, here's a list of what we've talked about so far. how they learned about the needs and concerns of the district, solar installations versus farmland, abortion rights or choice, navigating a purple district, the education system funding, free community college, crime police, clean water, clean air, green jobs bond act, specific skill sets and positions, and general questions brought up by voters. So I'm going to open it now to the audience. If you have a question, I'd like you to stand up and tell us your name, be friendly, tell us where you live, and ask your question. I got one right here. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you for being here. My name is Thomas, and I am from...
Hold on.
So thank you for being here. Pardon me. I am from southwestern Connecticut originally, so this is my second year here in Otsego County and in upstate New York. So my first question is, in light of recent gun violence and the ongoing epidemic that has been gun violence and loss of life in our communities in Buffalo and in cities all around the country, what are you going to do to safeguard our community against gun violence and to close the loopholes that allow for such easy access to very dangerous weapons?
Are the questions limited to 1 minute? Did you say it?
Yeah, be lean of words. You know, a minute is a long time to talk. So that was great. We got your question. It's under a minute. So keep that in mind. We want to hear from them, not from you.
So one of the things you mentioned is exactly right. We need to close the loopholes that allow for people to buy online or to buy from somebody that they may know that allows them to transfer weapons without the need for background checks, which every gun that is purchased should go through a thorough background check. So that is one of the priorities. Another thing is the red flag laws. The red flag laws that that have been recommended and introduced can go a long way in addressing some of the gun violence issues, making sure that, especially in instances of domestic violence or in issues where the person may be a threat to themselves or others, that we are limiting their access, or in a lot of cases, completely taking away their access to firearms to limit the harm that they can do to themselves and others. So we need to make sure that we continue to enforce that we continue to expand that program. We need to make sure that that program is working effectively and that it is being upheld by courts and being implemented effectively.
In 2013, the SAFE Act was implemented after being voted on in December, I think, of 2012. And the first meeting I went to was an NRA sort of back meeting about their response to that law. And it was people were upset in that meeting for a number of reasons. And what I learned from that meeting was that some of those upset reasons were sort of predating that SAFE Act. And since then, we've looked at the gun violence in our state and in the country, and unfortunately, gun-related homicides have increased across the country. And even in New York, about 26%. And so it is reasonable to conclude that the SAFE Act being promoted as a bill to curb gun violence has not been successful. And this recent slate of gun laws, primarily the ones after the Supreme Court decision on the pistol permitting process, are similar to that in that they focus on the process of getting a gun and owning the gun, and not so much on the people. And so there's where I fear that some of the legislation in Albany is aimed at making an easy win for them to pass something through, but doesn't actually have systemic change to it. And so I think we need to focus more on the people, like the red flag laws that Colton discussed. And those are areas where we can do a great deal of benefit for folks. We need to sort of change the argument and the narrative about it, though, because most people, gun owners, NRA members alike, want background checks. Most gun owners, NRA members alike, want red flag laws. They are supportive of these concepts. And each person that I talk to, if they're an avid gun owner, they still want to talk about it, and they're open to these ideas of red flag laws. We just need to be able to articulate them clearly, and then also support the action that's going to take, because preventative measures like that do make a difference, and failure to do so has tragic consequences. And so we can do that. We can get the guns away from people that would use them on themselves or others. Red flag laws allow law enforcement to make that intervention to get that person away from that crisis. And so background checks and red flag laws are great ways to stop gun violence.
How about, oh, we have another question back there. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Michael. I'm from Albany, New York, and I'm a student here at Hartwick. I know that I heard on the list that clean water was a topic. I was wondering where both of you stand on the water infrastructure, because I know that that's been a big topic around New York State. So I just wanted to hear what you both would do in order to combat the water infrastructure that's suffering.
Michael, were you my student last year? Yes. I remember you. Okay, good to see you. Yep. On water infrastructure across New York State or in upstate New York, can you clarify that for me?
Well, I know that it's time, so we can just do upstate.
Okay. I have to admit, I'm not entirely sure what you're saying when you say water infrastructure, what you mean on that, though. I'm sorry.
I've been hearing a lot of different talks about cleaning up the water infrastructure, and there's a lot of separate pipelines and things of that nature.
Oh, with pipelines. Yes. And so this, as far as updating like Oneonta City water, there's discussion in different communities as far as trying to get their communities onto water districts, which would help with water quality and access for the residents in that area. That is something that is community driven, and certainly I would support, but it's also a hard process because you have to get buy-in from each of the community members, those that have land or property in that area. And so that can be a slow down process. But it's still important to do it because water districts are good for water quality, but they're also good for growth because we're going to have more people in this area. Micron's investment in clay is going to have an impact probably in Madison County. The Marcy Project, Wolfsby, is going to have an impact in Oneida County. There's going to be more people coming here, which is a good thing. And water districts help to ensure water quality and also for the ability to have more people in our area.
So first of all, in terms of our water sources, we need to be protecting our water sources. I grew up in Madison County, right near Onondaga Lake, right near Oneida Lake, and those two lakes are ones that we're working on right now depolluting. To some extent, you probably shouldn't even be swimming in Onondaga Lake, although I think they're starting to let people. But we need to start making sure that our lakes, our freshwater sources are cleaned up so we have access to that fresh water for the future. And we need to make sure that we are, as you said, as you brought up, replacing aging water pipes. We saw the devastating effects of those in Flint, Michigan, and across the country, and we need to make sure that that isn't something that's going to happen in upstate New York, and that's going to take a lot of investment, and our local communities can't be burdened with that investment. We need to make sure that that investment is also getting buy-in from the state, from the federal government, and we need advocates in Albany that are making sure that that investment is being made.
Good evening. My name is Danny Lappin, and I'm a former two-term county representative serving Oneonta's 5th and 6th wards, which covers Hartwick College. Thank you both for being here. My question has to do with housing, and in particular, what specific state-run programs would you be looking to either introduce or support or get rid of when you come into Albany, if elected?
So I think housing is a major issue in a lot of our communities. And so I think that the state has to have a role in that. So I think we need to expand affordable housing in upstate communities. Oftentimes when we're talking about affordable housing, we're talking about cities. We're talking about New York City, even Syracuse or Utica or Buffalo. But we need to be talking about affordable housing in our rural communities too, in our smaller cities, making sure that that's available to them and making sure that there is housing that is available to people who have low incomes. It'll help us address our housing issue with homelessness. It'll help us address a lot of the cost of living issues that a lot of our working families are facing. And so in Albany, I would fight to make sure that we are investing more heavily in rural affordable housing.
There's a few programs that I thought were of value that had expired that I'd like to see reinstated. One is, not to be too long-winded about it, essentially a tax freeze on properties that are rehabbed up to current better conditions for more families. And the tax freeze was that if you provide market rate housing, it could be a multifamily complex, that one of those housing units would be for more affordable or lower cost. And if you do that program, then your tax, the current tax is frozen for I think 10 to 15 years, which this is a good incentive because it means people will invest in rehabbing the buildings and the houses like in places like Oneonta where there's a need for that. Because when they invest, then they're not hit by a tax bill for this better, higher valued property. It comes in over 10 to 15 years. We saw a few projects that did that, and I think those are beneficial to the community. We can do more of those kinds of projects. To go back to the water infrastructure question, though, this is also an area where there's some growth opportunity in that there was a project that was proposed briefly about 6 years ago in the town of Oneonta for senior housing. This is an area of concern for many communities, is that affordable senior housing, how do we solution that? And a prospect was put forward as far as senior housing over in the Angel Heights area on the other side of the 88. And I think it was going to be between 60 and 100 units. And the project died because of lack of water. And because the cost was prohibitive for that developer to do it. So you can discuss the merits of that particular project, but what really stopped it was the inability to provide water for that area. And so this is an area where we can support growth and senior housing and other housing opportunities is, again, going after the infrastructure and being proactive and preempt some of those projects by making sure that the infrastructure is ready for it.
Do we have one more? Yep, last one.
Thank you. So my name is also Michael. This is my second year here teaching at Hartwick. I'm from Old Forge, New York, so I'm familiar with rural upstate New York. And as someone who researches, studies policing, its histories, what it does to and for communities with a particular impact in rural areas, I'm wary of the immediate jump to increase support and funding for policing. So I'm wondering if both of you could speak to ways of improving public and community safety in ways that don't necessarily involve more police.
There is as far as we talked about with housing and low-cost housing for people, this is an area where if you can get people sheltered and taken care of, then you can support them without having police involved. And so this is an area where we talked about low-income housing options, and also with Code Blue during the colder months, having warming stations and places for people to go. And this is an area where we have to have a better investment in general as far as housing options for low-income people. This would help without police. We also talked very briefly about mental health. And so sometimes the response when someone calls, maybe it's 911, isn't necessarily a police response, but someone who's trained to deal with a mental health crisis, as opposed to someone coming as a police officer who's trained for other things, but the issue at hand is something more in the mental health area, and having someone trained for that purpose, and having those kinds of people ready who don't come with guns, but come with ideas and solutions and referrals for them could help a great deal. So investment in police support is one thing, just like we talked about before, having the right number of police for the number of people in the area, but it's also expanding the area, not expecting police officers to do everything, and having mental health professionals be a part of that response unit.
So first of all, in terms of any additional funding for policing, I think those need to come with some firm regulations about what they can spend that money on and how they need to spend that money to actually be serving the community. Secondly, I think that we need to address the root causes of crime, which often come from lack of access to resources, including housing and financial resources, and from sometimes lack of education or mental health resources. And so we need to be investing in our social services, making sure that those resources are available to deter people from turning to crime. Oftentimes, when it comes to things like stealing and robbery and theft, those are often crimes of need, crimes that people commit because they don't have access to the resources they need to get that for themselves, so they take it from others. That doesn't make it right, but that is a societal flaw that we need to address, that somebody should not be stealing a can of soup from the local grocery store because they can't eat tonight. And so we need to address that. Thirdly, I think in terms of addressing crime that is happening now, we need to get more social workers involved in addressing crime and mental health workers. I'm proud to have the endorsement of the National Association of Social Workers of New York State, and I'm looking forward to in Albany working with them to get social workers more involved in addressing a lot of the crime we're seeing in our communities.
Okay, we're slowly wrapping up here. I'm going to give you guys just a minute to catch your breath, and we'll go to closing statements. But while I have a captive audience, I just thought I would tell you about a resource that the League has developed that you might be very interested in. It's called Vote 411. It is an online voter's guide. It can be used to register to vote, find polling hours and places, or as a guide for voters to learn where candidates running for office in your community stand on the issues. The candidates for the different offices are asked questions, and if responses come from the candidates, they're posted on the Vote 411 platform unedited by the League, and they're available to you to make informed voting decisions. I think things like Vote 411 and a candidate's night like this evening gives you a good sense of who these people are as people and who you might really want to vote for. Now we're going to have closing remarks. Colton, you. Oh, 3, 2.
I think it was 2 on the.
It was 2 or
form you
3.
sent out.
We can be generous. 3. 3. 3. 3. Thank you, timekeeper.
So in closing, I'd like to once again thank the League of Women Voters and Hartwick College for hosting this debate, thank Dan for coming here and engaging in a lively discussion, and thank all of you for spending your Wednesday night with all of us to discuss all of these issues. We talked a lot tonight about issues like education funding, reproductive health care, environmental policy, community safety, and gun violence. And I think as we address these issues, I want to say that I'm committed to fighting every day for Central New Yorkers. And I will always be responsive to you, not to wealthy donors, not to special interest groups, not to political elites who tried to tell you who you could vote for in this campaign. So in Albany, I will be that fighter. In Albany, we deserve an assemblyman who will fight and effectively bring back resources for Central New York. We need a coalition builder who has the experience of bringing people together and working across the aisle to get legislation passed. We need an energetic legislator with the know-how to successfully fight for our communities and get to work writing legislation and passing bills on day one. We deserve an assemblyman who listens to and serves our communities. So I'm ready to be that assemblyman. And I'm excited to get to work on day one fighting for our communities. And I look forward to continuing these conversations with all of you and working with you to make sure that our communities are served in Albany. Together, I truly believe we can build a better future for all of us. Thank you.
This is a good conversation tonight and really good questions. It's a conversation I hope continues. I hope you can reach out to me after tonight. You can find me on my website, buttermanforassembly.com. The email and the phone number goes right to me, so you get a direct response. I'd hope to hear from you. Criticisms, questions, all of that is good to hear because the conversation is going forward. Conversations exchange ideas because people are connected. And ideas can't go anywhere unless they're connected with people. So please keep the conversation going with us or with yourselves. That's how progress happens. I want to pivot a little bit, though, and focus my last comments on the students here, like Michael, and think about what it is that I hope that you will take away from tonight's and this whole process. And I want to give a couple quotes. They're from Brian Stevenson when he came here in 2018 and talked about his book, Just Mercy, and his hopefulness because of his experience fighting for civil rights. And so for the students here, I see such potential in you, I see such good things coming from you, that I want to remind you that you have the ability to make great things happen in our world. And I want to give you what Brian gave to us as a formula for success. So number one is commit to get proximate to the problem or to the people that you want to serve. Get so close to them that your progress is intrinsic with theirs. that you can only move forward together. That's empathy. That's working hand in hand to make things better. Get so close that you feel you cannot extract yourself from them. That's number one. Number two, do not accept the narrative as it is given to you. You are the ones that get to tell the story. You get to tell the story of the world that you want to be a part of and the world that you want to shape, and you're going to have the power to do that. Number three, sometimes facing the challenges that we have in front of us is difficult to do. And we have to accept the things for what they are. But in doing that, stay hopeful and know that the things that you are doing will have progress. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but if you keep at it, they will. And fourth is do the things that are a little bit hard to do. Maybe they're inconvenient or uncomfortable. I can tell you, though, from experience, it feels great once you've done it. And if you do these four things, I will promise you that you will find fulfillment in the things that you do, no matter what it is, because you'll be making a difference in our world. You might change the life of one person or many, but if you follow this formula, Brian is proof in the pudding of it, that you will make a difference and make a better world for all of us. So as you graduate from Hartwick College, or if there's any from SUNY here too, SUNY, you have the ability to do great things in our world, and I'm looking forward to you doing that. Our job right now is to build an environment for you to do just that, and I hope we will succeed at it. Thank you.
So voting will take place on November 8th at a variety of polling places around the area. Polls are open from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. That's all day. No excuse not to get there. Please go vote. Please take a friend to vote or ask someone else if they need a ride to go vote. Let's keep working on our democracy together because it's never quite done. Thank you very much for making tonight. Thank you very much for making tonight a valuable and participatory event. Good night. Drive safely.
Good job.